As Corinne said, today's scripture reading tees up this whole season. The 40 days of Lent mirror the 40 days that Jesus was in the wilderness facing down his demons. Now, having jumped around over the last few weeks around the Bible, we forget that this story, chapter 4, comes right on the heels of Jesus' baptism. Chapter 3 ends as Jesus comes up out of the water. The heavens open and the Spirit of God descends as a dove, and a voice from heaven says, "This is my Son, the beloved, in whom I am well pleased." Notice what the Spirit does next. Then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. He fasted 40 days and 40 nights, and afterwards he was famished. The tempter came to him and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread." But the hungry Jesus answered, "It is written, one does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." Then the devil took him to the holy city and placed him on the pinnacle of the temple, saying to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down. For it is written, he will command his angels concerning you, and on their hands they will bear you up, so that you will not dash your foot against a stone." Jesus said to him, "Again it is written, do not put the Lord your God to the test." So again the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. And he said to him, "All of these I will give to you if you just bow down and worship me." Jesus said to him, "Away with you, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve only God." Then the devil left him, and suddenly angels came and attended to him. May these words be to us our light and our life. Thanks be to God. Antarctica is probably the harshest wilderness on our planet. It is certainly the coldest, windiest, driest, and highest altitude continent. In 2014, Ben Saunders and Tarka Laherpiniere attempted the Scott Expedition. That is to walk on skis from the coast of Antarctica to the South Pole and back. The journey was first attempted by Robert Falcon Scott in 1910. Scott and his team made it to the South Pole, but were consumed by the cold on their way back. No one had successfully completed this trek since then. Ben and Tarka decided to attempt the dangerous journey the same way Scott had done it 100 years earlier, without any air drops along the way, carrying everything they needed on 200-kilo sleds for the 1,800-mile, 105-day expedition. What led them to attempt this dangerous trek? Ben said in an interview I heard, quote, "This is the high watermark of human endurance, human endeavor, human athletic achievement in arguably the harshest climate on Earth." And of course, some strange and predictable combination, he said, of curiosity, stubbornness, and probably hubris led me to thinking I might be the man to try and finish the job. End quote. though our hubris may not have yet led us into an actual wilderness. How often does human pride lead us into trouble? Into thinking the rules don't apply to us. Into thinking that we can control things around us. Into putting ourselves in the center of it all. Into trusting our own ability more than anyone else's. Oh God, as we look around, how much of the world's problems begin with our pride? And how often does the temptation to misuse power follow right on the heels of overblown self-importance? Now, who could have had a more overblown sense of self-importance than Jesus, who was just declared to be God's beloved Son in the story right before? But the Spirit that had baptized him was not done with him. The same Spirit that descended like a dove and blessed him led him out into the wilderness, where he's tempted 3 times. I'm just going to focus today on the first of these temptations, which inspired the theme for us for Lent. You see, the Spirit moves in mysterious ways, but perhaps it is just inevitable and even necessary that we must be led into some kind of wilderness experience before we truly understand our belovedness. The disorientation forces our shadow side out into the open where we can confront it. Ben described the conditions they faced on their journey across Antarctica this way. We didn't go indoors for nearly 4 months. We didn't see a sunset either. It was 24-hour daylight. Living conditions were quite Spartan. I changed my underwear 3 times in 105 days. The lowest wind chill we experienced was in the minus 70s, and we had 0 visibility, what's called a whiteout, for most of the journey. We couldn't see the horizon or the ground. It was like being inside a ping pong ball. He explains that they took turns leading, and Ben said it was such a huge relief to follow behind Tarka because finally there was something to look at, to focus on. There have certainly been some low visibility moments on this journey with cancer, with Megan and I. Anytime you face the unknown, a new diagnosis, a loss, a divorce, a fall, a tragedy, the world suddenly shrinks. There are no familiar landmarks anymore, and the path narrows. All you have is what you brought with you, and you wonder if it will be enough. I imagine a little bit that wilderness is like heading into that gray sky on these banners. What's just over that hill? Who knows? After 61 days, Ben and Tarka reached the South Pole and the research station there, the halfway point on their journey. But they didn't stop for long. They refused the hospitality of the researchers. No shower, no cup of coffee, no warm bed. Why? Because they were afraid once they had those things, they would never want to leave. So get this, they just took some photos, and that same day turned around and began their trip back to the coast. And this is when things got really hard. A strong headwind slowed them down, and so they decided they needed to cut their rations in hopes of having enough food to make it to their next checkpoint. Because you see, on the way down, they had stashed food strategically along the route, so they didn't have to carry all of it the whole way. And so food was waiting for them a few days ahead. But eating less made them lethargic and more susceptible to the cold. Again, Ben said, "It was very humbling indeed, as much as you might like to think as I do, that you're the kind of person who doesn't quit, that you'll go down swinging. Hypothermia doesn't leave you much choice. You become pathetic. I remember feeling like I just wanted to lie down and quit. It was a peculiar feeling and a real surprise to me to be debilitated to that degree. And then we ran out of food completely." After 40 days and 40 nights of fasting, Jesus was famished. And it was then, at that moment, that the tempter came and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread." Emptiness will make us consider doing some pretty crazy things, maybe even eating rocks. It is when we are the weakest that the voice of temptation is strongest. The voice of pride pushes back on the wilderness and says, "Don't quit, fight back. You have the power to save yourself. Turn these stones into bread." We want so desperately to believe that we have the power to manage it all. But hubris isolates us and severely narrows our choices. We assume the only alternative to pushing through and going it alone is giving up, is lying down, is giving in to death. And if you've been there, you know that at that point the pull of death can feel stronger than the pull of anything else. But turning these stones into bread would have meant the death of Jesus' ministry. The self-serving use of power leads us to death. Jesus shows us that true power comes when we empty ourselves from self-emptying and serving others. And so Jesus stood up to the devil and humbly said, "It is written, one does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." Now he's quoting here from Deuteronomy. In doing so, Jesus suggests that faith offers us a way out of the pitfall of excessive pride. When life feels like an empty wasteland, when death has a hold on us and pride makes everything feel like it is either our fault or our responsibility, Jesus reveals that there is a larger reality that has been created and named by God that holds us. Our salvation does not depend upon what we can do alone. Our souls can be fed in many ways that don't lead to our self-destruction. There is a deeper satisfaction that can be found when we rely on God's help. Back to Antarctica. With no food and a long way to go, Ben Saunders reluctantly agreed to call in a resupply plane with enough food to get them to their next checkpoint. The plane arrived and dropped a package of food. Ben said that smoked salmon and cream cheese on crackers never tasted so good. made it to the next checkpoint and eventually completed their unbelievable journey. Ben now says, quote, "I don't regret calling for that plane for a second, but getting external assistance like that was never part of the plan. And it is something my ego is still struggling with." To me, taking on a spiritual practice for Lent is about struggling with our ego. That part of us that wants to be the hero of our own story. Spiritual practices invite us to pay attention to the ego's relentless demands, to stop responding to them, and to remember that we don't live on ego alone. Spiritual practices invite wilderness moments where we can practice relying on God and be led to wholeness. So a few weeks ago, I started eating less sugar and bread, and for Lent, I've decided that I'm giving them up. Now, anytime I mess with these comfort foods, I start to notice why I crave them. I see how often I turn to them when I'm not really hungry, but I'm looking for some other kind of satisfaction that they never really provide. When I'm not using food to try and fill this emptiness, I am suddenly free, forced almost, to look for other, more life-giving ways to fill it. With that possibility, I plan to seek the abundant life that God promises. I don't know what will happen exactly after doing this for 40 days, but I hope to have a different relationship with these foods and a different relationship with God at the end. Now, even though Lent is technically started last Wednesday, it is not too late if you want to take on a spiritual practice in this season. Corinne's going to have some more information in a minute for you about how you can learn about and start a practice even today. Where is the Spirit leading you this Lent? If it seems to have led you into some kind of wilderness, there is reason for hope. Resist the temptation to just push on through on your own. Confront the voices that try to obscure your emptiness, and instead rely on God's love and mercy. You so, and you too may be attended to by angels. Amen.